Now, an increase in defence spending or risk electoral wipeout. That's the warning from a group of Tory MPs who claim the only way to secure a Conservative win in the next election is to put security and defence front and centre.
Senior Tories, including Commons leader Penny Mordaunt, touted as a potential replacement for Rishi Sunak, of course, and former Secretary Ben Wallace are leading calls for a boost in spending, putting national security in front and centre of the Your Country Needs You election campaign.
Well, joining us now is the former Chief of General Staff of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt. Lord Dannatt, fantastic to have you on the programme. I mean, we've seen, haven't we, ever since the invasion of Ukraine, that everyone woke up and went, wow, attritional warfare, that's still a thing. Perhaps we need to get some weapons and send them to Ukraine and then restock our own weapons while we're at it. And yet, Jeremy Hunt made no mention of this in the budget. I don't think it's going to be the death of the Conservative Party. I think there's death by 1,000 cuts already when it comes to that hopeless outfit. But it is a very serious issue.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. And a brutal land war in Europe conducted by an aggressor, Putin leading Russia, is a threat that we ought to take very seriously. I know analogies with the 1930s are somewhat overworked at the present moment, but there are very strong analogies to the 1930s when Hitler came to power. We chose to appease him, we chose to talk to him, we chose not to rearm, and we were very nearly completely defeated. Our army was defeated in France in May-June 1940, and it was only the Royal Air Force with just enough Hurricanes and Spitfires that prevented us being defeated as a nation. So these glimpses back to history are really important. And the question is, I know there's a lot of pressure on the National Treasury in the round, but surely the first duty of government is to make sure that this country is properly protected, its citizens are protected, and that makes a very strong case to lift defence spending from 2.2% of GDP, where it is broadly now, at least through 2.5 to 3%, and actually you could make a case for 4%.
If there's anything positive to come out of this fairly grim situation in terms of the escalating global conflict and, let's face it, the threat of World War III, it is that I think the British public are starting to become very aware of the nature of this crisis. And what we're hearing is that unless Rishi gets to grips with this and then announces a rise in defence spending, people won't vote for him. Now, Jeremy Hunt 2 weeks ago obviously proceeded on the basis, oh, I've got to sort of cut to national insurance and try and sort of give the people as much money as I possibly can, so I don't want to waste any money on tanks and things like that. Well, it turns out that the people actually do want the government to spend money on tanks, military equipment and our defence. So the government needs to realise that the people want this now.
You're absolutely right. And I'm an independent member of the House of Lords. I don't follow any particular political party. But it's been pointed out to me that a couple of days before the budget speech on the Conservative Home website, there was a story that said that 75% of Conservative voters would prefer to see defence spending increased rather than tax cuts. So I'm not sure who he's listening to. I would have thought that at the very least he ought to be listening to Conservative voters. So if that's what they want, that's what they should have. And then in the budget speech, he said, well, we'll raise defence spending to 2.5% when conditions are right. Well, hang on. That's a bit like saying to Mr. Putin, oh, hold on, don't attack us yet because conditions aren't right and we're not ready. It's a bit like the bowler bowling before the batsman's ready in cricket. It's just not cricket. Yeah. Frankly, if these issues weren't so serious, they'd be funny, but they're very serious.
Yeah, I was going to move on to that, actually, because I think there's a very lackadaisical approach right now to international security and thinking, well, Russia just wants Ukraine. Is it really going to affect us? And I wanted to ask you what you think the big risks are to this country. We're talking about China's incursion into Taiwan and getting all those assets around the developing world, Iran and their proxies disrupting global trade. We're talking North Korea going tonto, Russia and the games they're playing in Africa, as well as, you know, threatening Eastern and Central European countries. What is it that we you sort of have to be most alive against?
Well, you've described a pretty unstable world, that little list, haven't you? Those are all concerning issues. But I think to cut to the chase, whereas we might be concerned about tensions between China and the United States over Taiwan, we're quite rightly concerned about what's going on in the wider Middle East and certainly the effect on international shipping, and that has an economic consequence. But actually what should be really concerning us most is the situation in Ukraine and the way that it has consequences for the security of Europe. Why else would Sweden and Finland at this stage in their history have decided to join NATO? Why else would Poland be now increasing its defence budget to 4% and growing the biggest army in Europe? Because they are genuinely worried, sharing a common border with Russia, that if Putin is not faced down in Ukraine, and that's another whole discussion topic, then there is the chance that he will flex his muscles elsewhere to drive through Belarus towards Kaliningrad, through Lithuania, and that's a real worry. And of course, Lithuania, like the other Baltic countries, are NATO members and therefore are covered by the collective security of Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. You know, would we go to war for Lithuania? Would America go to war for Lithuania? Well, under treaty, we're obliged to do so. So it's what's going on in Europe that it's most important to take seriously. But the big issue is that if we ever got into a war, the cost of that would be disastrous. What is less disastrous is increasing what we spend on defence to deter war. I'll just give you a couple of quick facts from history. In 1935, when Hitler was becoming a threat, we were spending less than 3% of GDP on defence. Yeah. When appeasement had failed and the war broke out in 1939, we shot up to spending 18%. Wow. And in 1940, when we were fighting for our very survival, it was 46%. Gosh. That's the disastrous cost of fighting a war. What we should do is pay the premium, the insurance premium of 2 or 3, 4% on defence now to make sure we deter war and don't get into that awful situation again.